Good evening, and welcome to the League of Women Voters Third Climate Change Forum. This one is entitled Renewable Energy, Where We Are, Where We Need to Go, and How the Public Can Help. Our speakers are Barry Jacobson and Carla Lewis-Miles. My name is Jay Rosenbeck. I'm chair of the Natural Resources Committee of the League of Women Voters of Alachua County. And along with Jeff Shapiro, I co-chair the Climate Action Team of the League. The two of us, plus Roberta Gastmeyer, are responsible for putting this forum together. Before introducing our two speakers, I want to take care of two pieces of business. First, I will explain some of the structure of our forum so that the audience can participate maximally. And second, I want to provide a kind of context for this discussion of renewable energy. It's important to climate change and also all the other things that must be done for a total response to this crisis. So first, to the organization. Each of our speakers has been given 25 minutes to make a presentation based on their experience and data. After each of them presents, there will be a 15-minute question and answer period. 15 minutes for Barry, 15 minutes for Carla. Audience members will be able to address questions to the speaker by using the question and answer function, and we would urge you to start those questions early so we have a chance to get to as many as possible. Our interpretation of the Sunshine Law suggests that these speakers, because they are both members of the Utility Advisory Board, should not answer the same question, and we'll ask for your cooperation. The webinar chat is live and will be a site where you can enter websites and other ancillary information. A short conclusion will follow the forum, will end the forum, and we will post this forum in a few days' time to the League's Facebook page and YouTube channels. And now for the context, I'd like to begin with a quote. This is from Wallace Brucker, who is a geochemist at Columbia University. He says, "The climate system is an angry beast, and we are poking it with sticks." Now, fossil fuels and profligate energy consumption are two of those sticks. And replacing poking with stewardship of the climate system will help reduce its anger. But it's not just the climate system that is mad. So are citizens on either side of racial, income, opportunity, and political divides. And despite what so many consider the moral imperatives of responding to climate change, those responses can be resisted. Even renewable energy will be opposed if unsupported by the principles of social and environmental justice. And it is at the intersection of social justice and environmental justice and the transition to renewable energy. It's at that intersection that our society's best hope for a prosperous future resides. In 90 minutes, we cannot address all those issues. Thus, this is one in a series of climate change forums. What we hope to accomplish with this one is communication of sound information and sound opinion about renewable, especially solar energy, what other actions need to be taken, and how the community can help. The League, this organizing committee, and our speakers recognize that the information presented this evening is only part of an equitable, effective response to our climate crisis. But it's a critical part, so I'd like to introduce our two speakers. First is Barry Jacobson. Barry is co-founder of local solar design and installation company Solar Impact and a member of the Utility Advisory Board. He will discuss utility, commercial, and residential solar, the contributions to 100% renewables of each, and he will talk generally about the challenges of energy use and achieving climate change goals. Carla Lewis-Miles is an active person in our community and is Neighborhood Revitalization Coordinator for Alachua Habitat for Humanity. She also serves as a volunteer on the City of Gainesville's Utility Advisory Board, and like Barry, strongly supports the community's commitment to reducing emissions and to 100% just renewable energy. Carla will discuss opportunities for community involvement and remind us that the source of our energy is but one influence on preserving a habitable environment. And so now we will begin with Barry. Barry, the microphone is now yours. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jay, so much for doing this, and also thanks to Jeff Shapiro and Roberta Gassmeyer for setting this up, and thanks to all of you for being here. This is a topic I feel very passionately about. This is something that's going to impact all of us. So I'm going to cover some, why are we doing this? Why is this important? When do we need to do this? How can we get this done? And what can each of us do to help move this forward? So why? I'll start with the big question. I like to start with the big picture. The Earth's an amazing place. It feels very stable, but we are at this perfect place in the solar system, in the galaxy, where water flows. Sometimes it gets some ice, sometimes it gets hot, but we can all survive. It's easy to think of it as very permanent, but it's a very fragile. People talk about destroying the Earth. We're not going to destroy the Earth. The Earth's been through far worse. We just may destroy ourselves. So this is why I get up every day and do what I do. Most of us know the Earth goes around the sun. A lot of people don't realize that with the way it's a little bit of an oblong, and it's on about 100,000 year cycle of at what point is the Earth going to be summer and closest to the sun, or winter or spring. It's just a very slow over about 100,000 years. And that roughly translates into the CO2 levels following about 100,000 year life cycle between about 180,000 and 280,000 up and down. So when you're at the top, you're going to get the most melt. This is what Florida looked like about 120,000 years ago. Most of South Florida from Okeechobee Downs underwater, Jacksonville, lots of areas, Tampa, underwater. What's really kind of amazing is 18,000 years ago, which for some of us wasn't all that long ago, Florida was much bigger than it is today. Here's where we are today, following normal kind of cycles, kind of somewhere in between, with the one exception of that CO2, which has suddenly jumped up into levels that we haven't seen for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of millions of years. CO2, we can deal with the CO2, but the problem is temperature and CO2 are tied together. To give you an idea, back in the 1850s, we're about at the peak, about 280, everything's fairly normal. 50 years later, we're hitting 300, which is really weirdly high, not never seen before. 50 years later, we're at 315. 50 years later, you can see now we're really starting to jump. Just 10 years later, we've jumped up 17 parts per million. And now 4 years later, we've jumped another 17. Basically, we're accelerating up. This is not where we want to be. This is going to cause major problems. And aside from just things getting hotter, so many of our systems are based on temperature differential. The Gulf Stream is weaker than we've seen it ever. The jet stream is no longer as stable as it used to be. So rather than being this nice little circle around, it's starting to wave, it's starting to break up. And what that does is allow hot air to go up, cold air to come down. This was the start of summer, I believe 2 years ago, first day of summer, Alaska had the hottest day on record. Same day, Colorado sees the coldest day, 2 feet of snow. This is just bizarre weather that we're going to continue to see more and more of. They're talking about having Category 6 hurricanes because of that warm Gulf. We watched something I'd never seen, and I'm from Florida, a hurricane go from tropical storm to hurricane in just days right in the middle of the Gulf. Things are changing fast. Most recently, we saw this big snowstorm in Texas. About 10 years ago, they had another snowstorm. This was a big one. Major power outages. The governor of Texas got on and was blaming solar, blaming renewables. Oh, look what happened. That's not what happened. For those of you who are hoping I'd show you some Florida administrative code, here you go. In Florida, basically, by law, all of our utilities have to have 15% reserve. Texas is a highly deregulated state, is decoupled from the national grid, basically lets the utilities pick. They're doing about 3% reserve. That means if the demand goes up 3% over what they expected, things get bad. And that's what happened. Things went up. They weren't ready for it. Natural gas lines were freezing. The solar was shut down. The wind was shut down. Basically, they created this problem. 11 years ago, they had something similar happen and didn't respond. This was very much a man-made, just skating on the edge event. When do we need to start acting? Yesterday, or many years ago, actually. I know the city's renewable goals are 2045. Sometimes it really feels like it's, okay, we're going to keep going along until 2044, and then America is going to happen, and we're going to suddenly shift, and then 2045, we're going to be ready to go. Look, we did it, 2045. The problem with that, if you look at these curves, so if you look at this first curve, if we started in about 2000, we would have had 30 years for each 50% reduction. So plenty of time. Looking at today, in about 2020, gives us about 10 years for each 50% cut. So we have to go much faster. If we wait another 5 years until 2026, we have months to go and do a 50% cut. That means we can't push this thing off. It's like you're heading for a brick wall. It's like you just can't wait to the last second to hit the brakes. It's going to be too late. You can see, by 2026, we basically have lost. And we say lost, that means we have not stopped the worst of the climate changes. Once we hit these kind of points, really, really, really bad things are happening. The systems are falling apart. This may come as a surprise to a lot of you. Where does GRU fit in? If you look at this list, Duke, Florida Power and Light, TECO, municipal solid waste, biomass, sulfur, biofuels, landfill gas, GRU's at the top, 32% is coming. Now, a lot of that comes from the biomass plant, which I know has been controversial, and I'll touch on that a little bit. We're one of the leaders in solar, could do more, and we actually have a decent amount of landfill gas. Now, if you look at the new solar power purchase agreement, this new 50 megawatt solar farm that's planned, that would jump us up to 7.3%. Quite honestly, all the utilities have a ways to go to be where we need to be, but GRU really has done a lot. And I think as much beating as GRU gets, a lot of times they deserve a lot of credit. Again, we are well ahead of the rest, primarily because of the biomass plant, but we are doing things at GRU. And I should say, I'm not here as a representative of GRU Utility Advisory Board or the city's advisory board, but I feel fortunate I get to see a lot of stuff. So how can we make this happen? What are the knobs we can turn? First one is electrification. We need, if we have a bunch of gas-powered cars and gas-powered furnaces and turbines and all these things going, we can do all the solar and all the renewables we want, which are producing electricity. That's not going to power your car. That's not going to do things. Really, we need to figure out how to make more things electric so that as we go to renewables or something else comes along, we're ready. We have to get there. A concept that I really appreciate is this idea of reducing your committed carbon. So if you go out today and you buy a gas car, you're probably going to keep that car for 10, 15 years. It's going to be around. That's committed carbon. You're committed to burning carbon in that car. Or if you have a gas furnace, you're probably committing to 20, 30 years, or you're a gas water heater. You're building a new natural gas plant, you're probably talking 50 years of committed carbon. So a lot of this is just to say, it's not saying get rid of everything. It's to say, as we're replacing, don't be adding something new that's committing us to either a whole lot of future or oh, I'm going to buy it and then throw it away, which makes no sense, obviously. Another concept I want to talk about is life cycle or cradle to grave. This has been a big discussion and honestly fairly heated discussion again last night at a utility advisory board workshop of, okay, how's natural gas? If you take a look at how much CO2 does natural gas produce from the time it hits the power plant to the time it comes out the smokestack, it's twice as good as coal. If you compare it to biomass, it's actually, biomass is one of the worst. If you just look at that narrow window, if you look at the whole life cycle of natural gas, especially with fracking, there's all the energy that went into getting it, there's all the methane that was released, which is 30 times worse, it's all the pumping, it's moving. Natural gas and coal are in the same ballpark. So this idea of the life cycle is really important because climate change doesn't care when it happens, where it happens. To say this thing is green in the time that I held on to it, you really need to be looking at the entire life cycle of something. Solar has really taken off. It's a big part of what I work on, obviously, but a big part of the answer to where we are. Just real quickly, what is solar? And I know most people are in favor of solar, but a lot of people don't know what it is. So solar panels are out there in the sun, collecting the photons, converting that into electricity, DC power like your battery, that goes down to an inverter, which is kind of like what you use in your car to get 120 volt and plug in a cigarette lighter, converts that to AC power, which goes and feeds your house, your business, whatever it is, at the same time as you're on the grid. So you are on dual power sources. The solar power gets used first because its voltage is just a hair higher. If you're not using the power, it's sold back to the utility. So a very simple system about saving money, saving energy, increasing the amount of renewables, whether it's at the home scale or the farm scale. That's the concept. Why has solar taken off so much? In this chart, and hopefully, Jay, we can still see charts. So back in 1975, let's say a typical solar panel we use today, 400 watts, would have cost about $40,000. That price has dropped dramatically. In 2015, it was down to about 61 cents. By 2017, we're looking at 35 cents. By 2020, it's still about the same. It's actually crept up a little bit because of some tariffs, but it's about in that range. So that 400 watt solar panel is now $140, $150. So 40,000 versus 150. That's an exponential decline, which causes an exponential increase. So in 2020, we're up to 583 megs. That's obviously not the scale. That would be below this chart away of how quickly this is just shooting up through the roof. The basic idea, the financials work. Solar has become one of the cheapest sources of electricity, even without huge incentives to make that happen, which is just really exciting because it doesn't become a question of how much is it worth, it just is. Battery technology is following close behind. It's just getting to the point where it really has started to make sense. This happens to be the Tesla Powerwall, something I personally install because it's the best thing out there. I can honestly say that's price point, best features, not the only thing out there. But basically, this is just getting to that point where it really starts to make the financial sense. Wind farms, you can see this picture was not taken in Florida. That's because the wind is not good in Florida. I'm a sailor. We average about 3 miles an hour. We just don't have the wind to make wind a viable alternative. Also, wind gets to be more controversial. I see beauty. Other people see a major eyesore. As I said, I'll talk biomass just real quickly. It's the devil's in the details. Is biomass good or bad? I'm not going to talk about the deal that was made or any of that kind of stuff, but we can see the biomass has been one of the cheapest currently sources of power that GRU has. Sometimes it's the cheapest depending on what the price of natural gas is. So it varies from year to year. Again, this is about life cycle analysis. So biomass is not created equal. If you're out there cutting down, growing trees, cutting them down, shipping them up into pellets, bringing them to the biomass plant, and then burning them, that's a terrible idea. If you're taking what we're doing here in Gainesville, I know some people argue this, but taking yard waste, taking waste from construction that was going to either be left to rot or burned in the field and bringing it into the plant locally, that's a positive. That's not perfectly net zero, but but as close as you can get. I was talking a while back to Pat Post. He's the one who gets all the wood for people like Sunny, huge piles of wood. He says it's not worth the money to put it on the truck to bring it to the biomass plant. So they're not paying top dollar. You know, he's clearly saying, no, it's not worth it to be cutting new trees down. I'm not the expert on this, but I would invite people to check the facts. Again, that's where some biomass can be good, some can be bad. You really have to look at the details. And I tend to talk about not all renewable. Nuclear is definitely not my first choice, definitely not my last choice. Compared to producing carbon, I would take nuclear. Unfortunately, with the time it's going to take to build plants, it's just too long to really get there. Fusion would be great. Again, I wish we had time to wait for fusion. If we're busy electrifying a grid and doing what makes sense, if fusion comes along, fantastic. But we can't be sitting there waiting for the next great thing. So finally, let's talk what can we do? A lot of this comes down to money, and that's not all a bad thing. We need to be saying, what can we do? What makes the most financial sense? Where can we put our dollars and have the most bang for a buck in terms of improving the environment, reducing climate change? And it's not all a negative. Solar is the top creator of jobs for the power generation energy. If you want new jobs, not even close. As coal is phasing out, as natural gas hopefully is phasing out, I would love to see, job training to get them into new, clean, green fields. One thing we can really do is support good policy, good programs. We need to be, encouraging strongly our representatives to be supporting programs. During the Obama administration, many people are surprised to hear we didn't have any great new programs. The tax credits that were available under George W. continued through Obama, which was great. No big changes. A lot of people would have thought Trump was really anti-solar. Trump was not anti-solar. We got some tariffs. Again, the tax credits lasted. We actually got an extension of the tax credits at the end of the Trump administration. Joe Biden is very much pro-solar, pro-renewables. We're waiting to see what's going to happen next. But solar really and renewables really have been, as much as anything can these days, been favored by both parties, which has been fantastic and really what we need to be doing. Our local utility, I mentioned before, a power purchase agreement. I've been kind of amazed to find this is controversial. It's a really cost-effective way to get renewables in. GRU and the city aren't risking anything financially, aren't putting the money up. Someone else is doing it, paying for it. We're just buying the energy at a fixed cost, which is at a very reasonable rate. I know some of the farms have made missteps on not talking to the community before it goes in. Solar doesn't kill birds. It doesn't blind people. I wish it didn't cover land that could be used for other things, but compared to the land, we just don't have choices, unfortunately, at this point, and it's a relatively small piece of land. Florida Power and Light, some of the big utilities are doing big solar. They have a lot of big needs, so we are keeping up with them per capita. But the things that they can do, both on the solar and the battery side, that maybe they can do that we can't. And so rather than investing our own money into our own projects, it may make sense to invest either somewhere else in Florida or really somewhere else in the world. This is not like water quality where it's a local problem. It's a worldwide problem. If we can reduce the climate impact everywhere, it affects all of us. So it doesn't have to be here with us, but it's just about how do we make this happen in the best possible way. So I'm not saying we should shutter all our plants. There was an email exchange recently with the general manager of GRU, Ed Bilarski, that if we just shutter some stuff, if we just say, okay, if we quit shipping natural gas to homes, it actually takes more natural gas today to produce the electricity to replace that. So we're not saying shutter things. Again, this is about committed carbon, about not building new stuff. Next slide. And again, it's about decarbonizing. It's about personal choices we make. I have a natural gas furnace and water heater at home. I'm looking at building a new house, and as we replace equipment, of course, we're going to electric. So it's not about throwing things away today. It's about continuing to make those choices of what can we do. Next. Electric vehicles, just such a fantastic option. Some really great options these days are coming out in electric vehicles, cost affordable. We're taking petroleum, something that is definitely not a local thing, something that we're not benefiting from, and moving them on to GRU, which will help GRU. That's a great way to, again, decarbonize and have an impact. And then, if it's appropriate to put solar on your home, of course, this is something I work on every day, is how can we do that? The great thing, it's cost affordable. For most people, you're making 12 to 15% annual return on investment. You're adding to the value of your home. You're making your home more desirable. If you put solar on your home, your neighbors are 8 times more likely to put solar on. So you are having a solar impact, if you will. In addition to that, the utilities, I can quite honestly say, get freaked out whenever people put in solar. Even though for most utilities it's less than 1%, I give you talks to utilities. I tell them, here's how you can stop solar: is you put in a lot of solar. And they are doing that, but we are definitely having an impact by doing that. But this is something we can do today that has a definite impact. And then it's about businesses. This one happens to be the Hunters Crossing Chevron, the first solar-powered gas station in Gainesville, which I find very ironic. You can see the 2 colors. That's because we did it in phases. The blue phase at the top, the owner, Jeff Montgomery, great guy, just wasn't sure about it. His partner, Bob, definitely wasn't sure about it. They said, let's try it, see how it works. And now we put in the second phase, and they're saying, well, can't you squeeze a little more on there? So they are totally sold on our solar-powered gas pump, solar-powered car wash. And the financials were really good. Just unbeatable financials, because they get all kinds of federal tax benefits. Basically pay for half the cost of their system. And then if you're rural or if you're ag, there are additional benefits on top. This is a pole barn, or what we call a solar support structure, because that gets additional tax benefits. They get an additional program that can save them another 25%. Basically, they can pay for their system, making 35% annual return on investment, paid for in less than 3 years. So it becomes basically a no-brainer financially to do these programs. So there are things we can do today that can have a direct impact on renewables and decarbonizing our environment. Finally, in conclusion, I'll give you a second. This is a Thomas Edison quote over 100 years ago, talking about moving to the sun and solar. It's unfortunately today it's not running out of oil and coal. We have enough oil and coal to keep burning. It's just we'll have destroyed the environment by then. It's about how can we do this and how can we do this now. So with that, I thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Barry, and good management of those slide issues. You have a variety of questions. Let's start with the first. I'm concerned that GRU leadership is not in alignment with the city's goals regarding climate change. It seems they mostly tell us the reasons why we can't accomplish our goals rather than how we can. So you're asked, what can we do to ensure that they're supporting the vision our community has agreed on?
That's a great question. And again, we had a utility advisory board workshop last night that got a little heated, but in the end, I think we had some good discussion. And I said to Ed Bilarski, the general manager of GRU, I feel for him, that every time we say, let's do this thing, let's get rid of natural gas, I feel like I've seen his hair turn grayer and a couple more hairs fall out, which I can relate to. That because he's trying to run this utility, he's been told, keep the general fund transfer up to fund all the city's programs, cut costs, reduce the cost of electricity. As he's watching expenses go up, an aging fleet. So he is, even without renewables and without these goals, everything we're suggesting is going against all these other priorities. So he has very mixed priorities. Now, all that said, GRU and the general manager work at what's called the pleasure of the city. The city commission runs GRU, they make the decisions. So if you want GRU to do something, it's through the city commission these things happen. I'm always happy to talk to people. Every member of the utility advisory board is, so that's a voice you can have, but also reach out directly to say, these are things we want to have happen. And that's the purpose of the utility advisory board, in my opinion, is to give this stuff thought, not just throw out half-cocked ideas, but to help get in there and dig. But that's where you can have that benefit.
Thank you. Questions just keep getting easier, Barry. The second is why can't we do all of this with rooftop solar? Why do we have to drop big arrays into neighborhoods and so on?
Okay, another good question. I get that one a lot. And this kind of really shows my colors. I installed rooftop solar, so there's part of me that gets really excited by the question and the implications of it. Um, I love installing rooftop solar. I love when I first turn a system on and it starts to run. I've had customers literally dance when they're watching that meter spin backwards. So it's really exciting. There are two problems. First, not enough rooftops. We're the tree city. Even without that, we just don't have enough rooftops to do that. And quite honestly, rooftop solar isn't the least expensive way to do it. The biggest bang for the buck are the big farms. That's where you can get a lot of solar. So rooftop solar, which is a good thing to do, and we should continue to do that, just won't get us where we need to get to. To really have that super mega impact, we need the farms. I know generally it's farms out in rural community, out in the, hopefully as far away from communities where they're not impacting people or taking down houses. I sure hope not. But that's what it is. Now, from a carbon point of view, people might ask, is should I take these trees down to put in the solar panels? Not even close. In a, the solar panel carbon offset is huge compared to any trees that are taken down. I run the numbers. We do a major tree planting every year with Alachua Conservation Trust. For those of you out there, please attend Tree Fest at Swamphead Brewery coming up in April. So I love my trees, but we need the farms to really get to where we need to get to.
Thank you. Next, Barry, can you address externalities in solar panel and equipment costs? The speaker said, or the questioner says, I get pushback from folks who argue that production of this equipment and panel uses non-renewables. So where's the gain?
Good question. And I appreciate the question because it gets to that life cycle. Like if you look at a nuclear power plant that might have a 20-year life cycle, 10 years are put into recovering the energy it took to create that plant. So now with solar, the numbers show it's about 9 months. So it takes 9 months of the solar panels being, producing energy to recover the energy that went into producing it. Some people will say, well, shouldn't you be using solar panels to produce the energy to produce more solar panels? That would be great. One of the solar panels we buy from, they have a plant in Georgia that has solar panels on top of it. Honestly, I don't care. If those solar panels produce electricity to go over here and I'm using black electrons to produce diesel, it's okay. But in the life cycle, in the externalities, it's immediately a net gain.
Next, I have solar panels on my home. When installed, it was recommended to wait on installing an inverter due to prohibitive cost. Has the cost come down enough to make it economically feasible?
You just make, they're talking an inverter, not batteries?
If you would like to talk about the difference and how each might impact the question, that might help us all.
Okay. So an inverter is what converts the DC to AC. We've been installing inverters for the last 14 years. I don't do systems. I mean, without that, you just have DC power, which you could run some DC equipment. Inverters are very cost effective. So I doubt they meant inverters, but if they did, the inverter technology is fantastic. It's 99, 98% efficient at converting the DC to AC, which is just amazing. Battery technology, I've spent a lot of years telling people don't buy batteries, and I still tell most people you don't want batteries. Now, one thing people really need to realize, if you have solar panels on your house and you don't have a battery, when the grid goes down, the solar panels go down with it. So you're sitting with this great power source on your house in the dark if you don't have batteries for something else. So for years, I told people get a generator instead of batteries. Batteries were big, expensive, hydrogen gas, limited life cycle, lead batteries. If you really want that backup power, things like the Tesla Powerwall, these lithium batteries, which aren't without their issues, are a really good alternative. They're still not cheap. For most people, they get two of them. You're talking about $15,000. Kind of cost comparable to a whole house backup, and really better in a lot of ways than that whole house generator. No noise. It takes care of brownouts. You'll barely see the lights flicker. 10-year unlimited warranty. So batteries are really getting there. But again, it's a luxury. It doesn't produce more power. It doesn't make you more money. It's about, I want to keep going when the grid's down.
Thank you. Clearly, people are concerned about placement of these arrays. We have another related question. What about the rooftops of the big box buildings? What can rooftop installations of big box stores contribute to our transition, Barry?
Well, that's a good one. It's not quite as cheap as the big fields, but I'm doing some of these kind of big rooftop installations, and the prices really do come down to in the ballpark, at least, of the big farms. So that is a great place to put solar. The other thing that the solar does that a lot of people don't appreciate is how much, even without turning the system on, you've now shaded the roof. It's not directly on the rooftop, there's an air gap. So it's like having this great big umbrella over your building. We did a mini storage a while back, and when the air conditioners went off, this is a conditioned space, they were basically saving half their energy because of the solar panels. Basically, the rooftop without solar is about 140 degrees in the summer. With solar, it's about 90 degrees. Your temperature, you have about 5 times less heat going into the building. So from that point alone, the solar does. So I think big box is a great way to go. And we're seeing a lot of big box do that.
And a related question. What about lots of microgrids, like covering parking lots with panels? And then also this questioner suggests big box store as another site. But how about parking lots and other more public spaces? Barry, how do they fit in?
Okay, so parking lots, I've done some covered parking. It's really nice. You get to park underneath it. That's kind of the other end of the spectrum. That's the most expensive solar we put in, because you're having to, especially here in Florida, you're building a big, strong structure to put the solar panels and raise them up high enough so people aren't going to hit them. They're out of the way. So in terms of bang for the buck, I mean, if you say that ancillary use of having covered parking, that makes the difference for you, that's great. But in terms of bang for the buck, let's get a lot of solar in there. That's not my last choice by any stretch of the imagination, but not my first choice in terms of getting a lot of solar out there. Microgrids, that's a whole different topic, with the idea of we'll put it in and share it with the community. Like put it in on a drainage field. There's some really cool stuff there. That's more of a policy issue right now. It's actually illegal in Florida to produce it and then try to sell it because you're not a utility. So we have some regulatory stuff, and that's where all of us can help make some changes there. You're not getting to the really big scale, but there is some potential there and some community solar things that are happening in other places that we currently can't do.
I think we have time for one more. Barry, you're an efficient answer, and we appreciate that. What about solar arrays in the median of our interstate highways or in other areas that are away from private property? Do those fit into the equation in any way?
I get that question quite a bit. The median along railroads. The problem is if you do a linear system like that, you have to move the power to a central place and then boost the power up, with a transformer to get the voltage high enough to really be able to move the power around. A long line of solar panels is the worst shape you can have. A circle of solar panels is the best shape, not the circles always, but at least a square, to be able to not have to put a lot of transformer. Basically, if you put along the highway, every probably 300 feet, you'd have to drop another transformer. It just becomes prohibitive. You'd be having to put up all these light poles. There are situations where that could work. Now a big popular thing right now is retention ponds as a potential. Again, solar panels are not bad neighbors. They're less smelly than some of the agricultural alternatives. They're much nicer than other developments, and they're nicer than windmills. So I appreciate where people have come from. I appreciate that some of the developers have not handled this well. But again, we're talking about our futures here, and we can't be pointing fingers and saying, oh, not in my backyard all the time. We need to be getting these things in and not putting up our own roadblocks.
And your efficiency paid off. You've got a minute for this last question.
All
For
right.
Gainesville, do you have any idea how much area it would take to produce 50% of Gainesville's power with solar energy?
I'm sorry, Jay, we're out of time. I wish I could. Honestly, I don't know the answer to that offhand. I mean, we're not talking, 100 square miles, which would just be a 10 mile by 10 mile area. So we're talking far less than that. Let's think if I can answer that question quickly. So the 50 megawatt one we were talking about is going to take about 200 acres. So if I can do my math real quick, so about 3 square miles to get to 6%. So I don't know. I don't want to do the math and I could be zeros off, but it's not an enormous area. I would want to put it downtown, obviously, but it's not an undoable amount of area.
Thank you, Barry. It takes a brave person to do math and a live presentation, and we appreciate your skills there. That ends this part of the presentation, and now it's my honor to turn the microphone over to Carla Miles Lewis. And again, prepare your questions for her, and she will address them to the limits of our time. Carla, the microphone is now yours.
Thank you, Jay, and Roberta, for the invitation, and for everybody that's online and took the time for this very important conversation. I wanted to just start by saying I believe in 100% renewable. I believe in the city's commitment to reach and run 100% renewable by 2045, and committed to helping find ways that we can do that. It's not going to be an easy thing to do. One of the biggest things I tell people from my community, and I get this question a lot, why won't GRU just go to all solar and save us all money? There's no easy answer for that. As many people already know, there's a lot of facts and figures that go into a public-owned utility company. So let me just start by saying and premising my conversation with, I do know that we need 100% renewable, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the pressure and benefit to the community, and how do we engage the community in meaningful conversation, not just hearsay, which is a lot what a lot of people I see depend on. Whatever information is out there, be it correct or not, be it partial or full, we seem to take that information as gospel. And so we have to do something more intentional in order to move our community along with the goal of the city to reach renewable. Myself being a GRU board member, I can tell you, I got an education out of this world from serving. Being involved and actually participating in the process changed a lot of my perspective. It taught me what to ask for, what to advocate for, as we're trying to make all these changes. So I wanted to talk first about the community as it relates to GRU. Already, there is a huge portion of our community that are impacted by higher than normal utility bills. One of the reasons why that is, I believe, is failing housing infrastructure. Not so much of the pressure, because there's such a difference. I do audits with CWC, and I've had an opportunity to look at utility bills and different housing types. And I noticed in the older housing and the housing where the failing infrastructure is, that's where you're getting utility bills $500 to $600. So then we started talking about, and my community is saying, I think solar will help figure that out. I think we can save money, we can lower our utility bills. But I would like to argue, if you're living in a housing infrastructure that is insufficient and not energy efficient, no matter what your energy source is, it's going to leak out of your home. So even with the creation of solar and other renewable energies that may be able to lower some of the rate pressure on customers, who's ready for it? And is it going to really affect those that are most impacted? I see people that are asking about rooftop solar who haven't had a new roof in 25 years. So how do we put a solar panel on top of that? And then when we put it on top of that, what is it going to do for that client if the windows are old and leaking? If there's holes in the walls, then what is our solar panels or our renewable energy really going to do for these people? So one of the things that I talked about when we talk about, or I think about when we talk about renewable energy and the need for it and the city's goal to reach it, how do we move our community along so that they can support it? So that when we save, because there's another piece of it. When we begin to save when we begin to lower the amount of revenue collected by our utility, then we have another issue. We have a responsibility as a public-owned utility to provide our profits to our city so that it can provide much needed services. I've sat on this board, I've been through budget season, and we've looked at that budget and just tried to look at what we could sacrifice to try to balance that out. Difficult task when you're trying to figure out, do we cut employees? You know, what do we do? We have aging infrastructure. We don't have things that if something breaks down at GRU, you don't go to Walmart or Home Depot to find that piece. So we have to remember that we have to keep our utility healthy. A public-owned utility has a responsibility to its city, not just GRU. All public-owned utilities have this dynamic. And so, although I am interested as a community activist in ways that I can save people and help people conserve, but at the end of the day, this conversation has to include the financial health of the utility. Because I, for one, especially after the weather that they had in Texas and some of the problems that they had with some private utility companies there, can appreciate the regulations placed over a utility company and can appreciate the rating of our local utility company. So as we're getting the community engaged, I teach my community that it is important, that the health of our utility is important. In the community, we figure they're the ones with all the money. So why do we care about how healthy they are? They got the money already. We care because of the quality of service that we receive here in this city from that utility company. So I want to make sure that we are addressing and making decisions and moving toward in a way that we are remembering. Ed Belarski has a task ahead of him because we need this renewable energy, but we have to do it in a way that we maintain the health, that we meet our responsibility, and that we don't have upward pressure on our customers that are most impacted. How do we do that? That's the big question. The need for renewable energy is not even our question anymore. There's enough science, there's enough presentation, there's enough information. We get it. And not just for the health of our environment, but for, as a nurse, for our physical health. It is important that we control climate change. It's important. And we already know that. The science is there. What we need to work on in this city is how do we do that in a way where the most impacted folk are not the ones carrying the burden. They're not the ones carrying the burden when we start to save the utility company money. I mean, when we start to save the clients money and it's lowering the amount of profit that GRU receives. We have to be creative about how we address those issues internally and externally going forward. And I wanted to talk also about one of the things to do in preparing our community for those changes. We have programs in our city. Some are GRU programs. I am a huge advocate of the LEAP program. I do, however, have a complaint with the way how accessible and how equitable it is to our community. With the LEAP program, it's helpful in helping address some of the failing housing infrastructure problems. I think they do windows, HVAC units and such. The problem is, just like with every other home repair program that is government funded, they have barriers that keep people from accessing them. If I'm a renter and I'm the one that's responsible for the utility bill, but I can't get those services because I don't own the structure, so I can't save, yet I have to pay into that program through taxes from my utility bill. If I live in heirs property, in which I do personally, I live in a family house and my sister doesn't live here, but I'm the one who pays the utility bill. And can I get assistance? But I need an energy efficient home too. And so government funded programs that are funded by HUD, they all have these barriers. I do critical home repair for Alachua Habitat for Humanity, and we're filling out the application and everybody qualifies until they're behind on their homeowner's insurance, or more than one person owns the home, and other issues that arise from that. How do we address those? One of the beautiful things about the revenue for the LEAP program from GRU is that this revenue does not come from HUD. It comes from taxpayer dollars, the utility. I call them investors. We try to be politically correct, but I say the investors, I say the company owners when I talk about customers. Those people are the ones that pay into that program. There should be no barriers to accessing that program. It should be need-based and financially burdened only. And so that is one of the things that we can do. That's our low-hanging fruit. We can start working to make sure that we're getting investment into housing programs. So when we make these changes, they are not problematic to the people most impacted. I want to talk about a house that I did right before our last rate change. And I did it, it was by accident. I had a critical home repair client, and we gave her a new roof. And in the process, we saw that she had some running lines or whatever in her house. And we decided it was our job to fix it. Problem was, our new with her old wiring system didn't match up. She kept shorting out and kept cutting off. She was fine with her extension cords, but we decided she needed to be healthy. So we went in there to change it, and we obligated ourselves to rewiring her whole house. During that same time was the last 2%, I believe, increase for rates that the city commission voted on. And I was having a conversation with this customer, and she said to me, when you rewired my house, my bill went down about $80. I don't care about your 4%. And that said something very loud to me. If we want to make sure that our community is not impacted, we need to make sure that they're healthy going in. And one of the things that we can do is start to address failing housing infrastructure, because the people that are complaining are not people living in energy efficient homes. The people that cannot support this are not people that's living in energy efficient homes. If we're going to address solar and other renewable energy sources widespread to go so that they can impact housing, we got to make sure that energy is not leaking from these houses to begin with. And so otherwise, everything that we'll do will be for naught. The next thing I wanted to talk about was, how do we engage the community? How do we get them to come in? I can tell you, I am a community activist, and it is hard for even me to say. I've asked, show up to the meetings, come to our UAB meetings, put your input, bring those utility bills, advocate for yourself, come in and say, and nobody shows up. But when I talk to them in the community, a lot of people have issues. I try to figure out where's that disconnect and what do we do so that we make sure the people are most impacted are at the table in these discussions. Right now, we're having a very robust discussion the previous panelists went through how solar works and all those things. It's nice if the community can hear those conversations and so that they can ask questions and become informed. And so I wanted to bring up a slide. I'm gonna share my screen right quick with you all. And I want to talk to you about a model of community engagement that we have been using here recently with Habitat for Humanity and housing and other sectors that we're working in. And it is participatory action research. One of the things that I would like to see, and I think one of the key pieces to us making sure that our community is engaged, and not just engaged, we want them empowered, and not just empowered, we want them educated, and not just educated, we want to put them in a situation so that when we need to make changes, that our biggest concern is not money. Our biggest concern is money, because that upward pressure is going to fall on somebody's shoulders. Whatever we do, whether we save or spend, whatever it is, those financial decisions falls on somebody's shoulders, and it is usually those most impacted. So those most impacted should be the ones that steering these conversations. One of the things I learned from working with Habitat, and even going through the process of being hired from my community to oversee neighborhood revitalization, is that Habitat International found out one of the best ways that we can get the most robust participation, the best data for research, is from those most impacted. It suggests that the experts are not so much the people with degrees that are sitting in, it's the people in the community that are impacted. So how do we go about engaging them and making sure that they're able to steer these processes so that it's sustainable and it's understood? And then you create also a new community of advocates for your renewable energy policies. One of the things I want to talk about is collaboration through participation and the empowerment of participants. Changing real life experiences. Doing research that will result in new knowledge, documented lessons that can be used for future use. And so with participatory action research, it suggests that we partner, develop a research partnership, build relationship, evaluate and sustain those partnerships. Right now, one of the ways that we do that is through different community fellows programs. A community fellows program, Greater Duval is working on one on contract with the city right now. And so Greater Duval has hired 10 participants from all over the city. And they are participating with Ann Wolf and the development team on the new comprehensive plan. They're getting input from people who have never been at the table. I can tell you, I listened to that first meeting and the input is amazing. What we're missing in a lot of our reports and our actions and the policies is the community's voice. We have to develop that partnership. We can't leave them out any longer when we're addressing issues. So when we make these energy renewable policies and we make energy policies and different things, the community has to be involved. And I preach this in the community. You have to get involved. You can no longer sit by and hope they figure it out and complain about it later. If we are intentional about strategically planning how we move about and make these policies and address these issues, then we don't have to take care of a lot of things after. So a lot comes in our design. We have to develop the right kind of research. We got the plan research design. Over in the right column of my slide, I have some tools that I use. And I want this to be the part of the presentation because it's something for you to refer to. So that when they say, what does she mean about partnering? Then you can go back and there's some information over there that you can refer to so that we can have some more future robust conversations about participatory action research. And then collection, the data and assessment, it results, participatory participatory action research results in the type of data that can be utilized in a more robust fashion. It is more inclusive data. It gets to those people's surveys. If you haven't seen a lot of the information on surveys and how effective surveys are, especially mail-in surveys, most of those in my community end up in the garbage. I learned when we had the moratorium on development, there was a lot of information that was included in the utility bill, and people had no idea because they just threw that stuff out and they just read the utility bill, so they didn't know, and they were asking questions after. And so we have to be intentional. We can't complain about that dynamic any longer. We have to do our due diligence as the professionals to meet people where they are. And so it's no longer what they can come if they want to. It's no, we're going to come to them because we want to make sure that we're covering our bases and we're doing our due diligence to our community. And then it's to analyze that data and try to figure out the best use for it. And that's why the participatory group process is really, really important, because it gets the minds thinking of those people that are in the community most impacted. They're looking past and they're thinking out of the box. Another side to this, let me finish this slide. Disseminate is telling and showing, sharing what you've learned, sharing with your community what you've learned, and then enacting the change, sharing the impact of the project, working with the city on policies with a new understanding, with not just it's all GRU and they need to fix themselves. How can we collectively as a community participate in that, so as they make these changes that we're not affected? One of the biggest benefits from doing research and community engagement here is the education component. You have new knowledge. You have new knowledge, and you have documented lessons. And so people are now coming to the table, not with what they think they know or what they heard, but with what they've learned and what they've helped to create. And so one of the things that I think is really, really important for us to do and look at as we move forward to 100% renewable is immediately, not waiting 5-10 years from now. I'm doing participatory research when it comes to housing. I'm doing it when it comes to equity in housing and some other ways that we're utilizing this tool. It is really important that we jump on this right now and we start engaging the people that are most impacted, so that they're at the table hearing these conversations, making sure that we're thinking of everything that affects them, because at the end of the day, it is their money, their funds that we're using to run this utility. And I'm going to stop sharing now. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about the engagement process. I know engagement has been down a lot since COVID. Last year, going in when COVID first hit, I was beginning a grant and advocating for neighborhood conservation overlay districts and some other processes tied to housing. And COVID hit, and I didn't know how in the world I was going to reach my community. A lot of people don't Zoom. I know a lot of us on this call, we're used to it by now. If you work in any type of industry, almost, you've had to do it, be it for a staff meeting or to actually conduct your business. A lot of us are on there, but there's a huge population of folk that are not going to do this process, and we still have to reach them. And so I wanted to wrap up talking about community conversations, and one of the ways that we've been engaging people outside of the community. We have been involved in what we call drive-through community conversations. They have been COVID friendly. We have gotten a lot of engagement. From November to February, we've reached 800 people, educating them on everything from neighborhood conservation overlay districts, building a relationship with UF, and other things. I would like to see us collaboratively work together to make sure that we're engaging our community in a meaningful way such as this, not waiting on them to come to our board meetings, because they're not coming. It's time for us to get out to where they are, meet them where they are, get out into the community the professionals, let them ask their question. We got to create time and space. We open up these conversations when we were developing our energy policy. We talked about an engagement piece, and then COVID hit and everybody was kind of cool with going to an online, something that people can kind of navigate through and give us their input. That's not good enough for me. That's not good enough for me when we have so many big money big money items and AMI and other things that we really need and we really want our community to support. But we have to get to a place where they understand what it is, why we need those, how it's going to benefit and help them, and then bring them to the table so that we can figure out what is the best way to proceed and keep our community engaged with what we're doing. And Jay, that's all I had.
I got to tell you, that's a lot, and I appreciate it. Usually, Carla, when I hear somebody say model, I start to get a little eye flutter, but I want to tell you, you put some flesh and bones on that model in a way that I know I appreciate, and I suspect other members of this audience appreciate it too. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We have a series of questions for you. We'll start with this one. Do we have local zoning laws that make possible the installation of enough solar panels to power, say, 4 or more homes adjacent to each other in the same street? And we might expand that just a bit, Carla, and just open up the question and hear your answer around local zoning generally. Does it favor solar? Do you have some feelings about that?
I don't. The local zoning, I don't think, I wouldn't say it favors solar. I don't know how much policy is contained in it. Solar right now, they're redoing the comp plan. So right now, it is a really good time to make sure that there is a solar focus in the zoning policies that they're recreating. They are in the midst of doing that right now, and the new plan should be acted in 2022. And they're asking for community input. So this is a good time to get with Ann Wolf, follow those processes for the comp plan to make sure that those policies in there. I can't answer any more than that.
Thank you. Here's the next. Starts with a short word that we all know. Yes, we need to improve structure, homes in Black neighborhoods. But just as importantly, we need rooftop solar on those homes. How can the county and city help low-income communities afford rooftop solar?
Well, it's first let me start by saying this. I used to make a lot of reference to, what the housing structure was like in Black communities. But I found out that it's not just the race that was separated for, it's different classes of communities that share the same issues, and they're not Black folk. So I just wanted to make that clear. In disadvantaged communities, the only thing that I see that is possible is assisting these families and fixing that housing infrastructure. Now, Alachua County Community Support Program have a beautiful program, the SHIP program, ran by Mr. Stephen Weeks. That program provides $20,000 in home repair dollars per home. Mr. Weeks has advocated that we change that to $50,000 per home so that we are able to do a more complete job. Because most of the time, with the cost of doing construction now and the cost of materials, and COVID has even increased that, a roof on a 2,000 square foot home might run me $11,000, and so your 20 is almost gone before we can even look at your plumbing, your electrical, or your windows. Windows are so expensive, it's ridiculous. So having programs and having funding resources, I've been working with a group, and we're starting First Community Development Corporation, and hopefully we'll be another funding mechanism to where we can, through grants, private and public partnership, get the funding to help address failing housing infrastructure in our communities where programs are restrictive. And so the city is trying, but they're restricted by the state. And the county is trying, but they're restricted by the state. So we have to know what's going on. People like, what more can they do? Well, they have these programs and they get these dollars, but they don't reach where they need to reach. What we can do with GRU and that little pool of money that we get for our LEAP program is to make sure that we're creating a LEAP policy that removes those barriers, because we don't have to put those barriers in there. We're not using the state's money. We're using our customers' money. So customers should be able to access that program and those funds.
Thank you. The next, if I wish to invest in the low-income community, how can I best do that with my limited funds?
Through the Community Development Corporation. So the main purpose for us creating, and it's about 14, 15 partners of mine that are working from all different sectors. And we created a community development corporation. And we created that to be a collective vehicle for investment. We're asking people to put the funds and the resources of the hands of the folks most impacted and let them make the best decisions about how to address these issues. When you do that, not only do you instill equity, but you make sure that that process is sustainable. One of the reasons that Habitat hired me from the community is because I have been through almost every social issue there have been. And if there was anybody that can figure out some solutions, it would be somebody that had been through almost all those processes and found a way to overcome a lot of those barriers. And so we have to make use of our best experts, and those are the people in our community. If you want to invest in low-income communities, we're creating programs, and not just your dollars, your time, your energy, your technical assistance, whatever expertise that you have, bring it to the table to First Community CDC and let us figure this thing out and start leveraging our dollars together.
Carla, you're making such good sense. The question line is now lighting up. One of our participants starts her question or his question with the observation that Archer Solar appears to have pitted neighbor against neighbor. Certainly there's conflict around it. And the question is, what are the solutions? How can issues like that be resolved?
So there's a thing we used to talk to when we were first starting Greater Duval Neighborhood Association back in 2013, and we were working with a great deal of stakeholders. There were so many people from different walks of life. Everybody had their own agenda. Everybody had their own thought about what empowerment looked like to the people. And we went through a period that we call, my husband titled it the grown zone. So I want you to understand and how we can make good use of, you know, we look a lot of times at neighbor against neighbor. I take Gainesville Rise as an example. When Gainesville Rise came, everybody thought it was horrible. They thought, you know, people started talking about NIMBYism, and I mean, it was like Gainesville, and it seemed like a bunch of chaos. And fast forward a year later, and these same people are sitting at a table. These same people have joined the Affordable Housing Action Committee. These same people are working in partnership. So I would argue that, like with any good relationship, that's part of it. That's part of it. What we have to do as leaders is to make sure that we're creating space and opportunity to facilitate these conversations so that we can channel that energy into action. And we're not just coming together and talking about our neighbors and how don't nobody know what they're talking about and my way is the best way and it's right. I believe if we create that space in which I've seen it happen with Habitat, I've seen it happen with Greater Duval, where we can find that common ground and then we can start to build from there. If we just continue to kind of let that go on and media kind of just highlight what the issue is, we can use that as an opportunity to bring our neighbors together and start some meaningful conversations, so that we can turn those conversations into action. Because if we don't, then it's just an argument.
Thank you, Carla. You're getting all kinds of compliments. I'll just read you one. A great presentation. followed by these observations. Clearly, the upcoming infrastructure programs from Washington must involve all, in caps, those in the community. How can we best do that and when? Nice, simple, straightforward question for you, Carla.
So I would say start now with this. Before we can make any type of action plans, that is my whole basis of my conversation here this evening. A lot of people are trying to figure out what we do, what do we do? And when do we start? And how do we go about it? What do we do? We have to start with the research. We have to collect the data and we have to work it from inside of the community. My answer in short is that we start right now with participatory research, find out what the issues are, who they're affecting, and what part of our towns, and then let's figure out the partnerships and collaborations that we need to build to address it. And that's nothing that we have to wait until 2045 or at the last minute to do. This is something that we should be doing on an ongoing basis throughout our city, just to make sure that we're adjusting our plans to address maybe new people coming in or different groups of folks coming in. I participated in Welcoming Gainesville, and there are a lot of diverse people in our community that are coming in. And so we may have to change our processes to fit. This type of research helps us to do that in a more efficient way. So I say, let's start right now and let's start with participatory research and let the community tell us the best way to address their needs. Same way Habitat did for Duval, and they didn't go wrong.
Thank you. This is a comment. I suspect you will have a response to it. We have a historically active neighborhood association, but for the last 10 to 15 years, has only been a core dozen or so on the email list. More than 50% of residents are renters. We need to engage more of the neighborhood. And I know that in your presentation, you have talked about engagement, but would you mind underlining a couple of main points about engagement for this particular questioner and for the audience generally?
I will. In a city like Gainesville, if we don't address the issues that are affecting our renters, we only got half the problem solved, and we're still going to have a big issue. Not just the student. When people hear renters, we automatically go to students. A lot of people in our community rent. A lot of people are on subsidized housing, and so they have a totally different dynamic and typically are left out of these conversations. One of the things that I would like to see done as I go through and trust. By now, you can figure out I will be addressing a participatory research project surrounding energy here in the near future. But one of the things that I plan on doing is making sure that a part of that core group are people that have rental issues. And then following closely the Alachua County Labor Coalition, who did a lot of advocacy that's ongoing surrounding just that. How do we address the issues and make sure that it's equitable for our renters, and making sure that they're not paying for stuff and taking on the responsibility that the landlord should be taking on. And so making sure that the power is shifted where it needs to be, and bringing these people to the table as well. So as we're engaging, when I say homeowners, I'm not just talking about those, I'm talking about those people like myself. I don't own the house that I live in. I basically rent. But I have the same issues that renters have, but I can't have my issues addressed because I'm only the bill payer at GRU and not the homeowner. And we have to change that dynamic so that we can make sure that what we're creating is equitable for homeowners and renters. We should be focusing on customers of GRU and not the status of the person's home, not their home ownership status. We should be focusing on the people that are obligated to pay us and making sure that they're in a healthy place so that they can be able to do that. So I definitely support renters as well.
Thank you. Another participant has asked you two questions. First, how many staff did it take to reach 800 people? And second, Do you see a way to do participatory events for the Archer issue that is so emotional right now? Take them in either order.
Okay, so first, for my community conversation events, because they were drive-through, we used 4 staff to set up. I paid for 100 meals at local food trucks because at the time COVID had hit, and those businesses were taking, you know, a little hit, as all businesses were at the time. So I would go and prepay for meals. I bring them up. I have information that I hand through the window. So there was 4 of us. We social distance. Each event had about 4 people. When we had a bigger event, like our Halloween event and the event that we had to launch our community development corporation, those required a little bit more staff, but I would say between 5 to 8 people typically got it done each event. And then those events were broken up into about 4 events. And so there were about 200 participants per. And as far as the Archer, one of the biggest things that's important, and I teach this when I do my quality of life framework that I learned from Habitat, you have to take the leaders in that community. And I don't mean the folk down at City Hall. You got to take the people that are having the argument, those 2 people, the most voicey, because you can almost guarantee if there's a side A and a side B, there is a main person leading each side or a main group of folk. And so my thing would be to engage those 2 persons. Somebody has to be a conduit. That's one of the things that I try to my best to do. Somebody has to build the partnership, and somebody has to start that dialogue and create that space for that to happen and become like a mediator. And so I would suggest reaching out to those 2 persons. And as difficult as it may be in the beginning, and it is typically difficult, it's typically worth it to continue to make sure that you bring them together, let them flesh it out, respect what they got to say, the negative, and be appreciative of the negative. I learned that working with you. I used to fall apart about a no, or when somebody said my program won't work, or when somebody said that don't make sense to me. I used to fall all apart because it made perfect sense to me. But then I took that, started taking that opportunity to improve, to make sure that I remove the barriers that they suggest, to make sure that I'm looking at it from all angles, to respect the opinion of somebody that's not me, and make sure that I find a way to incorporate their ideas so that they can have the buy-in. Because if it's just your thing, that's one thing. But if you let them come together to plan what it is, you won't have a hard time selling it. And so it's important to make sure that those folks are empowered to be able to fix their own situation in Archer.
Thank you, Carla. That was an excellent presentation, as was the first. Excellent answers. And you gave, both of you, Barry and Carla, a real spirit to this forum that transcended so much of what we see in webinar and Zoom, and we appreciate it. Barry did do math. He said 6 to 7 square miles. I would like to end with a quote. This is from Bruce Usher, whose most recent book is Renewable Energy. He says, "The transition from fossil fuels to renewables has become inevitable." Now, I remember, because I am of a certain age, reading about another transition that only in retrospect was inevitable. And that one was from animal power to steam power. Now, some of you may remember your history as I do, for example, of the Erie Canal. For years, those barges along the Erie Canal were towed mostly by mules. Then along came steam power, and those mules and those mule skinners who controlled them were out of jobs and out of luck. Our community needs to solve the issues around solar energy, or Gainesville and Alachua County risk becoming the 21st century equivalent of the last mule skinner on the Erie Canal. And we don't want to be that last mule skinner. I'd like to thank Jeff and Roberta for their work behind the curtain, to the audience for spending time with us, and to our speakers for their thoughtful and database, experience-based, useful information. And with that, good night, stay safe, and thank you very much.